When my son Nick was about 9 years old, he came home one day and announced to us that his class had been studying the Ten Commandments and learning them. And he very proudly began to recite them for us. But he only got as far as the one about the parents. You know, the one that goes, humor your mother and your father. He said, humor your mother and your father, and I have to admit, Chris and I couldn't help ourselves. We burst out laughing. And Nick looked surprised and a little hurt. I guess it wasn't our finest parenting moment. But I love that version because, you know, when I think about it, I think really there is some truth in that. Humor your parents, your mother and your father. Not just because Nick, as he grew older, got to be extremely good at being very charming, even when he wasn't doing what we wanted him to do. I guess he humored us. But because humoring someone, oh, come on, humor me, it implies a kind of going along with, it implies actually to me affection and respect and wishing to keep someone happy, to honor your relationship. And those commandments, that commandment, really in its original context, it didn't mean 9-year-olds doing everything that their parents told them to. What it meant in that original Exodus context was when you're grown up and your parents are old, that you still take care of them and respect them. It's part of a code of moral living that says that people have value even when they aren't particularly useful to society anymore. And that is something worth keeping in mind. But I wonder, you know, when was the last time that you really gave a lot of thought to the Ten Commandments and how they can guide a moral life? I'm sure that there are people here who can still recite all of them and get them right. But I think that as a society, we've kind of stopped thinking about them, stopped keeping them in mind. Maybe because they don't seem very detailed, and our lives in modern times seem complex. And it seems tempting to say, well, they don't really address all the problems that we have to deal with, so they aren't really relevant to us. I'd like to talk about reclaiming the commandments as our own today, but before I do that, I want to go back and sort of talk a little bit about that Exodus story, about that day when God appeared to the people on Mount Sinai with smoke and fire and thunder and lightning and blazing trumpet, and scared them so much that they said, we don't want God to talk to us anymore, Moses. You can go and talk to him, and if he has a message for us, you can pass it along. That'll be fine with us. We've been reading our way through Exodus, and we've been reading about the people being freed from slavery in Egypt and beginning to wander in the wilderness. We've read about their doubts in God's providence, and we've read about the ways that God kept proving that God was there and was taking care of them. They were hungry, and God said, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. They were thirsty, and God told Moses to strike the rock with his staff, and water gushed out. It took them 40 years to get to the promised land, and really it wasn't all that far, so why did it take so long? It took that long for them, by give and take, to learn that they had this relationship with God, that was a covenant relationship that implied obligations on both sides, that implied that God would be there for them. I am your God. You will be my people. And at the same time, it implied obligations on their part of faithful obedience. It was a relationship, and it went on. We read about this, and I preach about it, because it matters to us, because this is our story too, and this is our relationship too. So I want to encourage us to think about the commandments and to think about how we can incorporate them into our lives and reclaim them for ourselves. And I don't mean that just in a sort of a simple legalistic way, but I mean really looking at the deep meaning of how they fit together as a package, and they spell out a way of approaching life, a moral approach to life. They sort of divide somewhat into two sets. There's the set that have to do with our relations with God, and there's the set that have to do with our relationship with our neighbor, with our brothers and sisters. And they both work together. So the ones about faithfulness to God and not having idols, in the Exodus context, idols were made out of stone or wood. They were the false gods of the neighbors out in this part of the world. Well, I don't think any of us have made an idol out of stone or wood lately, but we have our own idols. We have things that we hold up and adopt as important in our lives, sometimes as more important than God. That's a kind of a wrong sense of priority. Or maybe take the one about taking the name of God and using it wrongly. That's not just about saying, oh, geez. It's about, the Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann would say, it's about trying to take over God's power and think that you can use it for yourself. The commandments, as I said, about relations with neighbor, they're about respecting all people as children of God, as made in the image of God, and as worthy of respect and honor. I want to especially encourage us, since it is Sunday, to think about keeping the Sabbath holy. When I was a kid, I was told that that meant, well, you go to church on Sunday and that you've kept the Sabbath holy. In the hospital on Long Island, in my hometown where I grew up, if you go there, they have a Sabbath elevator. It stops on every floor, all the way up and all the way down. The reason for that is if you are an observant Jew of a certain group, if you push that button, you're operating a machine, and that's work. But if you just step on and go to your floor and step off, that's not. Presumably you're going to visit someone, and that's an act of charity. My grandmother would never run the vacuum, I remember, on the Sabbath. I remember that particularly because it meant that I couldn't be ordered to do chores on a Saturday. Well, not all of them. We still had to wash the dishes and all that kind of stuff. And when I was doing my chaplain internship, I think I've mentioned before that I had a young colleague. He was 24 years old. He was studying to be a rabbi. And when the Sabbath came, Friday evening, he went home. He turned off his cell phone. He turned off his computer. He turned off the television. 24-year-old guy, these things basically were his life, at least 6 days a week. But the Sabbath was different. He stopped. In some ways, I think it's a challenging way of living to us when we imagine those things. But it doesn't have to be those things. I mean, it could be. It's whatever it takes for you to remember that time and creation are made for us, not us the other way around. It's a way of remembering that we are not slaves. We're free. We should be free of the obligations of our very now society, which wants everything done right away, right away. We let ourselves get sucked into those things, and I think we forget, we step back and we forget a little bit. I think it's important, even though it might seem challenging, not necessarily to obey any list. You can't do this on Sunday, you can't play cards, not to obey any list, but to remember that all of creation is for us, and the good things are for us, and to stop and enjoy them is really very important. So that's my challenge to myself, really, as much as you. I know that some of you will leave here today and probably have to go to work. I get that, because I have to work on Sunday after all. But if you can, what I'm saying is, just think about it. Don't go shopping. Turn off the television. Skip the internet. In fact, don't turn on the computer. Enjoy your family. Enjoy nature. Take a walk. Sit outside for a while if it gets warm enough. Call someone you like. Visit someone whose company you enjoy. Get in touch with a friend. Any of those things are ways of remembering that all of the good things in life, all things bright and beautiful, were made by God for our enjoyment, and ordering our lives the right way in accordance with that is a way of honoring that. Amen.
Amen.